All right, my name is Major Kevin Krupski, and I'm the officer in charge of West Point's Policy Debate Team. I want to welcome you all to the first official annual Army versus Air Force debate. While Army and Air Force have debated on an ad hoc basis from year to year, this is the first formalized event that we will declare a winner between the two academies, and as we all know, there is no substitute for victory. As we look around the academy this week, we see cadets competing on multiple fields of friendly strife, and it's apropos to look at this event and realize that the same men that declared that on the fields of friendly strife were sowing the seeds that on other days, on other fields, will bear the fruits of victory, recognize the importance of intercollegiate debate. Indeed, when General MacArthur was the superintendent, every cadet company fielded their own intramural debate team. Our teams today feature Cadet James Hickey and nationally ranked debater Quanzel Castone, debating for the Army. And they will be arguing the affirmative today. And for the negative, Air Force features Cadets Sarah McClellan and Doug Attino. And so today, in the 21st century, the relevance of policy debate is even greater than those times back when MacArthur cared about debate. 20 years ago, we recognized the importance of the strategic corporal in 21st century warfare, and these cadets will very shortly find themselves to be strategic lieutenants at the tip of the nation's spear, having to wrestle with the same strategic implications of their decisions. In a nod to 21st century relevance, the resolution today stands as, quote, the Department of Defense should substantially increase its offensive cyber capabilities. With the existence of a brand new Army Cyber Institute just a mile down the road, it's hard to underestimate or understate the importance of this topic. I want to thank our judges today for taking time out of their busy schedules to be here today. We're graced first by Brigadier General Cindy Jebb, West Point's Dean of the Academic Board. Ma'am, thank you for your continued support of Army debate. We also have the Dean of the Air Force Academy, Brigadier General Armacost. And last, we have Brigadier General retired Lori Sutton, who currently runs New York City's recently founded Department of Veterans Affairs. Ma'am, thank you for coming up from the city this evening to judge us today as well. So first, a few ground rules. In the spirit of debate, any views expressed will not necessarily reflect those of the cadets, the respective academies, or the Department of Defense. They're here trying to win. The debate timeline format is in the handouts that most of you have received. We ask you to refrain from applause during the debate, and at the end of the debate, each judge will vote for which side they felt won the debate and explain the reason. With that being said, in addition to the judges, we're going to take some audience participation with a very unscientific pre- and post-debate poll to see if our debaters change any minds in the audience. So if I can have an agreement, a show of hands, of who agrees with the resolution that the Department of Defense should substantially increase its offensive capabilities. Please raise your hands. We have 26 hands. Right. And please raise your hands if you are against the resolution. Okay, we have 3, so, 4. Okay, so, pretty lopsided audience. We'll see if Air Force is able to change some lines there. So, with that being said, and without further ado, let's begin the debate.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Cadet Quanzel Castone, a first senior, United States Military Academy. Before I begin my speech, I'd first like to do a couple of thanks and introductions. First, I'd like to thank the panel, General Jebb, General Sutton, and General Armacost. It's definitely a privilege to be able to debate in front of such an esteemed panel. Next, I want to thank Ms. Amoroso and the people who work at Cullum Hall for allowing us to use such a powerful venue as the War Memorial Room in Cullum Hall as our debate location. Third, I want to thank our brothers and sisters at the Air Force Academy debate team for arranging this with us and coming out to West Point for a week of fun and for this debate. And last but not least, I want to thank the Corps, those who are here and those who aren't, for the words of encouragement and love that they've shown us this week when it comes to our preparations for this debate. The team is always, always proud to represent you, and we're always strengthened by your support. Now, there are certain inventions that change fundamentally the way that human beings interact with the world. They expand our horizons, and they offer us an infinite amount of possibilities when it comes to achieving our hopes and our desires. Now, the rise of computers and the internet definitely represent a change in the ability of people when it comes to solving the problems that we have and experiencing the world that we live in. Now, this tool, no matter how amazing it is, still is governed and used by human beings. Thus, that means that just as there is good for the internet, there's bad that can use this tool and twist it to become a menace to societies at large. I think it speaks volumes that in 2015, former CIA Director John Brennan, arguably the most secretive man in the world, had his email breached by unknown cyber assailants and sensitive documents exposed. Now, cyber attacks have become an integral part in the way in which modern war is waged. Now, war changed significantly in the 20th century with the introduction of the aircraft. Now it has shifted its horizons to cyberspace. It's because of this change and the need to be able to actively defend against attacks versus passively swat away threats that we find it imperative that you join us, the United States Military Academy, in affirmation of the resolution that the Department of Defense should substantially increase its offensive cyber capabilities. Now, we hope to gain your support through 3 points. 1, better offense leads to better defense. 2, offensive posture is important. And 3, the versatility of cyber weaponry is necessary to engage with an increasingly complex world. But first, offense does make for better defense. Now, current Department of Defense ideology is really focused on defense or deterrence, stopping ongoing attacks or looking for breaches in the software that we may have that may tempt someone to want to attack us. And it is quite effective. Holland and Hart in 2015 reported that out of the 30 million cyber intrusions that the Pentagon documented from May of 2014 to June of 2015, 99% of those were intercepted. But even that 0.1%, that 30,000, offered the unfortunate opportunity for an adversary to expose military hardware blueprints, leak troop movements in theater, and even release personal, financial, and personal information on military personnel. Now, these attacks only grow more sophisticated and diverse in nature. The Wall Street Journal backs this up with an article published in 2015, marking that 29 countries have significant formal military or intelligence units dedicated to offensive cyber efforts. The list of these countries are sprinkled with enemies, friends, and all those in between. Now, whether friend or foe, countries around the globe are understanding the significance of the ability to access other nations' servers and discover their intentions before they're at their government's firewalls. An increase in offensive capabilities by the United States is only an increase in the capabilities of us to defend ourselves. With better offensive capabilities, we can understand other nations and their intentions before the attack occurs and eliminate the threat. But secondly, there's a need for active policy engagement. Now, the Air Force team may come up and argue that there are already offensive capabilities that exist. That is true. But the overarching theme behind any doctrine and government policy that has been made has been one that's focused specifically on defense of American servers. The Department of Defense in June this year described its 3 primary cyber missions as defending DoD networks, systems and information, defending the U.S. homeland and national interests, and providing cyber support. This mission is descriptive of cyber engagements now, one that's defensive. Our enemies, both state actors and non-state actors, have been combining offensive cyber capabilities with physical military doctrine and infrastructure to create the ultimate combined arms, soldiers with cyber capabilities. We may have offensive tools that we use against these threats, but we simply don't have the institutional infrastructure to turn these tools into actual action against our enemies abroad. An offensive posture encourages American leadership to develop the operating procedure for the offensive tools we have now, as well as the tools that we'll develop in the future. But finally, the versatility of cyber weapons is a way to respond to the growing complexities and conflict that the Department of Defense will respond to in the future. Now, no matter what world you picture in the future, it will contain defense challenges that are complex, geographically dispersed, and developing at ever-increasing speeds. Even more, the traditional tools of diplomacy and statecraft have only been weakened by the growth of capabilities among a wide slate of actors. Now, traditional military systems will eventually struggle to meet the scale and the depth of future challenges. This makes counteracting the abilities of our adversaries difficult in the current mindset. Offensive cyber tools address this problem in multiple ways. These capabilities have low maintenance costs, they can be tailored to impact an entire region, but also down to specific systems that exist in a particular time. This versatility not only is unprecedented in ability, but also can save lives, money, and increase the probability of success in a multitude of conflicts.
Okay, so starting with some projects now. First, how are you specifically increasing the offensive capabilities? Are you using money? What are you doing?
So we think that there's two discussions that we have in our case, right? We think that the second point is one that focuses particularly on how we deploy these offensive weapons that we have. Secondly, we think that money is going to be a part of any increase in offensive capabilities. There has to be an investment of capital into the systems that we have currently.
Since our most secretive director was hacked, should we focus solely on defense versus increasing his offense?
I think that focusing on defense is a losing strategy. I think that the first point that I discussed in the speech that I gave specifically goes into how focusing on offensive capabilities not only help us prepare ourselves for the threats we see now, but also the threats that we can't even imagine that will exist in the future when it comes to cyber technology.
Okay, so if our enemies are increasing their cyber offensive means, should we contribute to the cyber escalation of arms?
So I think that a cyber escalation of arms is a little dramatic, right? I think that at the end of the day, what we're seeing are people taking advantage of technology and using it to prepare themselves for the capabilities that others have. If the United States does not do this, we will inevitably find ourselves at the whims of other nations who have capabilities that we don't.
Thank you. Before I start my speech, I would like to offer the same thank yous. Thank you to our coach and teammates who are constantly supporting us, and thank you to the honorable panel for spending your evening with two debate teams. I know you have busy lives, so thank you for taking your time. And thank you to the Army cadets who have come out and support us too. Even though you might be side affirmative right now, we'll hopefully sway you to the negation. Okay. So starting with my speech, I'd like to first give some refutation to the affirmative points before we get into the negations, positive points of matter, with describing how offensive cyber means is expensive, unreliable, and inefficient, and how the importance of prioritizing defense and how it can actually lead to a better offense. Before I do so, first some refutation. One, they give you 3 points about how offense equals defense, but I'd like to challenge them to actually come up with a method about how offense really does increase defense. Because we like to say that 95% of the interceptions that actually occurred were by solely defensive operators with no offensive intelligence whatsoever. We see that defense operators actually intercept these hacks and patch these vulnerabilities without offensive operators often, and we should focus on this versus increasing our offense. Secondarily, there are posturing and deterrent statements. The biggest refutation point to this is that when deterrence and posturing works, you have to claim responsibility for the weapon used. So if they're increasing their offensive cyber arsenal and specifically targeting how they deploy these weapons, we say the United States has to take claim to the usage of this weapon to actually have effective posturing or deterrence. Once they actually take claim to these weapons being used, we see the biggest point is when we use these cyber weapons under Title 10 in the DoD, it is perceived as an act of war. That is why we on the negation team are solely against this increasing of offensive. When we say nations are now in the right to legally retaliate against us for the deployment of a cyber weapon. Also, because we attack in the red space, the adversary-controlled territory first, they could escalate into a cyber warfare by being in the legal right to retaliate against us. We don't think we should put the United States in the position to actually start and initiate a cyber war against our adversaries, even if they are escalating their offensive means. Going into their last point of versatility, because we don't think that their claims of having offensive cyber means are inexpensive. And I'll explain this through my first point. about how the weapon of offensive cyber capabilities takes months to develop, and money is not the limiting factor, but human capital is. So we don't think throwing money at the problem is necessarily going to fix it, but you need to actually recruit millennials and recruit human capital to increase your cyber means. But even if you do increase your cyber means, we say that weapons cost about $50 million each, and to find a vulnerability in the enemy's network, develop a code to exploit it, and hope the enemy doesn't catch the bug. We also say you almost never gain administration privileges. So we say there's a cost trade-off here. Every time you spend $50 million developing one weaponized code, it's not spent in other areas, like increasing infantry or having maintenance against our valuable aircraft. So we don't think this cost trade-off is on the benefit side of using offensive means. We also say that weapons are time sensitive. If the target updates their network software or even changes anything in their operation security, then offense is garnered useless because the link chain falls apart. Or if the weapon code is actually discovered either before deployment of the weapon or in the beginning stages, the weapon is then quote-unquote burned, which means the enemy actually patches the vulnerability in their network system, and then the weapon is garnered useless, and you can no longer fulfill the entirety of your mission. So we say that $50 million is wasted with a low probability of success, but even if the affirmative team does garner success, there's no pure destruction. Once a bug eventually is caught by the enemy, which has historically always been true, they can wipe their server and then turn to backup servers to continue their operations. What's an example of this? We can look no further than Stuxnet. When Iran located the virus, they wiped their current system and they bought new SCADA systems to continue the enrichment of uranium. It wasn't offensive cyber means that brought Iran to the negotiating table. It was other military means. So we don't think that offensive cyber weapons have any pure destruction and therefore are a waste of $50 million DoD dollars. Going into my second argumentation about the importance of prioritizing defense and how it can lead to a better offense. One may say the bomber doctrine in the past was wrong because the idea that the aggressive force always gets through is incorrect. There's a low probability that it actually is a successful weaponized code. So we say it's better to focus on defense to increase the probability of success. Because defense is asymmetrically effective. In the Air Force alone, we have 1.5 million vulnerabilities or patches that need to be fixed, because if the enemy exploits it, it could escalate to administration access. So we say that asymmetrically effective, once you patch the hole, you no longer worry. You have a 100% guarantee that the enemy can no longer exploit this avenue into our home network. We say that of the dangerous hacks that are caught are done so through defense operators alone without the intelligence from offensive ops. So we think taking money and throwing it into defense versus offense will allow effective and 100% probability use of mission completion through patching these millions of vulnerabilities. Why? Because we say the main power controlling one home target versus millions of targets worldwide will be better use. We also say that defense leads to better offense in the future through defense operation penetration testing in the blueprint realm. We say fuzzing takes place to discover these vulnerabilities in our home network, and we can patch them and then hand that information off to offensive operators. We say this leads to cheaper and safer offensive means. Because we have this obligation to actually protect ourselves and citizens in defensive space before we look to offensive, we say we must prioritize an increase in our home network versus anything else. Thank you.
Are you ready for problems?
Yes.
I guess the first question I have is, what guarantee do you have that a defensive posture will stop other nations from wanting to take offensive capabilities and use them against the United States?
We don't think we can ever solve for enemies wanting to penetrate our networks, but what we can actually do is increase our ability to defend against these attacks. By defending against these attacks, we have to patch the existing vulnerabilities so they cannot exploit our system.
So, if there's no guarantee that other nations won't continue to use offensive capabilities against the United States, that means that there still is a threat of cyber war, no matter what. Is that true?
There is always a looming threat of cyber war, but when there's a threat of cyber war, we say the best offense is a great defense. Because when we protect ourselves at home versus going at large, we need to make sure that we can win the home battle first.
Okay. My last question is, $50 million, how does that compare when it comes to the cost of other hard technologies that the United States may purchase?
$50 million could be a drop in the bucket for the DoD budget, but we say that $50 million could have been used elsewhere, like defensive operators, increasing their salary, or increasing actual employment, or using other means.
So just as my competitors and teammate have done before I begin my speech, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out and joining us tonight. General Jeff, General Sutton, General Armcost, thank you so much for spending your time with us and hopefully getting something out of this debate and this incredibly enriching activity that I know Quanzi and I, and I'm sure our teammates here at Air Force could agree to, has benefited us personally very deeply. Thank you to all of you in the crowd for coming out tonight and supporting us. We know that the Corps is behind us and that powers us along every step of the way. Ladies and gentlemen, in a 1789 letter from George Washington to John Trumbull, President Washington explains, offensive operations oftentimes is the surest, if not the only, in some cases, means of defense. Now, I would like to give credence to what the Air Force Academy has said with their point of defense leading to better offense, but I feel better resting on the side of offense leading better defense when I have General Washington on my side. President Washington's wisdom has not faded. It rings true in this debate. In order to preserve our security, the Department of Defense must substantially increase its offensive cyber capabilities. This debate comes down to three independent and equally potent reasons to prefer the affirmative. First, offensive cyber weapons are far more versatile than any conventional weapons in the United States arsenal. Secondly, investment in our offensive cyber capabilities necessarily improves our defensive cyber capabilities, and it does so more effectively than investment in defensive cyber capabilities alone. I'll get to this later. Lastly, offensive cyber capabilities fill the gap. They fill the gap between diplomacy and war, hard power and soft power, and ultimately, peace and death. So I'll make it real easy. 1, versatility. 2, defense through offense. 3, filling the gap. Under this framework, I will respond to each of their arguments individually and explain why their advocacy makes our world a more dangerous place. Let's start with the argument of expense. The cadets from Air Force have asserted that further investment into offensive cyber capabilities bear a cost that the United States could not pay. This view is remarkably short-sighted and fails to depict the cost curve of cyber research relative to traditional weapon systems. Mara Lead of the Center for Strategic and International Studies explains that while cyber weapons may have research and development costs associated with them, this cost falls off quickly as production and deployment costs are incredibly low relative to traditional weapon systems. Secondly, at the operational level, the utilization of cyber capabilities saves money going forward. If a cyber weapon could be used in the place of a kinetic weapon, the United States could avoid the cost of rebuilding or repairing infrastructure. An example of this could be raising a bridge remotely in place of demolishing it. This is the way in which we win the hearts and minds of a population against an insurgency. Lastly, the affirmative team believes that these research and development costs are a price worth paying to ensure the security and safety of our country for generations to come. And talk about the feasibility of building up our offensive cyber capabilities in a world in which the cyber realm is constantly evolving. The cadets of Air Force have asserted that the returns on the investment in this domain are uncertain. To demonstrate the flaw in their logic, I would ask the judges to apply Air Force's framework to kinetic weaponry. Had the U.S. military looked at the leadership of the MRAP program in 2007 and told them that investment wasn't coming because the vehicles were untested, our nation would have significantly more loss on our conscience. But thankfully, defense intellectuals such as yourselves, judges, were willing to act. And because of that willingness, MRAPs were produced and deployed, and roadside bomb fatalities decreased by 90% from 2007 to 2009, according to a USA Today report. Now, we find ourselves at the same crossroads, with a threat looming underneath the surface and a solution that requires smart leadership and investment. We trust that you judges will answer this call once again. Further inaction is not a price that we can afford to pay. Lastly, we look towards current capabilities as firm evidence of the feasibility of cyber weaponry. The cadets from Air Force bring up the point of Stuxnet, and we need to look no further as the reason why that's a capable offensive cyber weapon. The Day Zero cyber weapon that shut down the uranium enrichment facility in the Natanz nuclear facility in Iran. I cannot answer towards our role in this attack as the United States. Perhaps someone better knowing than me in this room can, but I do know that that if the United States does not have that capacity, we need to, because our enemies and our adversaries in the outside world do have that capacity. I would conclude my time by reminding our gracious judges of how imperative our action on this matter has become. In the past 2 years, we've seen countless attacks upon American industry, such as those on Sony, Blue Shield, Home Depot, or JP Morgan Chase, to name a few. Within the realm of government and defense, these attacks on our American system are even more frequent, with immensely devastating potential harm to every American. Given this necessity to act, we hope to have demonstrated the best method of action is within the realm of offensive cyber capabilities. There are 3 reasons for this: versatility, offense through defense, and filling the gap. Thank you for your time. I'm open for cross-sects. The Air Force.
So we'd like to start out and say, if this offense is as effective as you say it is, wouldn't it be important for us to be developing defense?
Right. Yeah, I think that this is going to be the sort of central theme of this. That it's better to invest in offensive or defensive capability. And really, where the argument stands is that when we invest in defensive cyber capabilities, we're solving yesterday and today's problems. When we invest in offensive cyber capabilities, we're solving tomorrow's problems.
Sure. So would you ever use a weapon if you had no idea what the blast radius of said weapon would be?
Right. I think that this goes back to the MRAP example that I provided in my speech. Just because every specificity of the realm of possibility of the weapon is not known, doesn't mean that, one, we shouldn't have the capacity to employ it in the future once that capacity is better known. And secondly, that it doesn't mean it's any less imperative towards our security right now to continue the research and development. I think that is a key point to note, that capacity does not necessitate action.
Thank you. I guess since everyone's doing it, I'd like to thank everyone in the room one last time before we get into our speeches. We all really do appreciate you coming out and supporting us. In my speech today, I'm going to be talking about 2 points of matter why the negation team is going to be winning this debate. The first one is the idea of a cyber arms race and why we think that is always going to be more harmful when you develop offensive weapons. And the second point is you would never use a weapon if you could not control the effects. So before I get into these points of matter, I'm going to get into some direct rebuttal on their case. Because they say this debate is coming down to this idea that we need, defense is always going to be more important than offense. And that is true, because we tell you that defense is asymmetrically better. Because every weapon that we use, every cyber weapon is hyper-specialized, and it takes $50 million to develop each one of these weapons. If there are hundreds of targets overseas that we would have to hit for them to be effective, for us to effectively deter every actor, it only makes sense if we can strengthen our home system and spend that money at home that we would be almost unbeatable on this front. We tell you you're never going to hit your opponent's center of gravity when yours is unprotected. That is why we prioritize this. But besides that, we think that when the Department of Defense uses these weapons, it becomes an act of war. That is a point that Sarah brought to you in this debate. They tell you that it is de-escalatory when we use these weapons rather than kinetic strike. We tell you it is escalation when the Department of Defense is using them rather than the NSA. Because when the NSA does it, it's under Title 50. And they can do things like that. The CIA does some pretty sketchy things all the time. But when the Department of Defense does something like that, it is us actively, as a government, declaring war on another state. We do not want to give that ability to commanders at lower levels to be able to launch attacks on world superpowers, possibly causing a nuclear war scenario. Also, we know a few things about wasting money, right? We're the Air Force. We have these big budget projects like the F-35. But we tell you we are even uncomfortable with the amount of money you're going to have to spend to develop a single cyber weapon, right? Because $50 million for one target, and it is a one-time use weapon, is never going to be a beneficial world. It is always going to be a waste of money. Because I'm telling you that I could drop a JDAM for $100,000 for someone because we can't tell them how many weapons we have, which is always going to be a problem. Let's look at a couple of examples of why it's inherently escalatory, right? Because we think the first one comes after we released Stuxnet into the wild in Iran. What does Iran do? Well, number one, we essentially gave them the blueprints to a weapon of mass destruction in the form of code that they turn into a virus called Shamoon, which they released into Saudi Arabia on an oil company. What does the US do to respond? We use another cyber weapon called Flame to spy and take information from their government. What does Iran do in response? They do a denial of service attack on New York banks. We tell you that this is the narrative of cyber weapons. It is inherently escalatory because we see that we don't have these immediate consequences. It doesn't kill people. But we tell you as soon as the Department of Defense starts to do it, that will be the intent. And since it is inherently escalatory, that is going to be problematic. We also tell you that defense is the only way to break this cycle. Look to the Air Force doctrine. We are so pro-Air Force on our side of the house because we think their focus is on defense, right? And it is inherently effective because one, it's more cost effective, but besides that, it makes the barrier to entry for the enemy to attack our systems far higher, making them not want to come into attack because there are other means that they can probably use. That is how it is de-escalatory because it increases the costs associated with cyber weapons. But now let's look onto this idea that cyber weapons you cannot aim them. Because cyber weapons each one is extremely different and we don't know what the effects will be. Let's look to Stuxnet again. Because after we release it into Iran, it shut down power grids in India, Pakistan, Western and Eastern Europe. This is important because they all use the same SCADA system. This is the collateral damage that you get from these weapons. We tell you it will shut down hospitals with neonatal care. We simply do not know where these weapons are going or what the true impact of them is until we release them into the wild. We don't know the blast radius. This is synonymous with the idea of us dropping chemical weapons in the wind, picking them up and moving them to another community. We never fully know the impact of that day. So we tell you that also that when you release a cyber weapon into the wild, you give the blueprints to the enemy. So if they are so scared that our enemy has good cyber weapons, we are only giving them better ones every time we use them. That is why Iran jumped from being the 8th largest cyber threat to the United States to the 3rd largest cyber threat to the United States a year after they discovered Stuxnet, because now they have the code, they have everything they need to build their own cyber weapons of mass destruction, and we think we have a problem with that on our side of the house. Cross-examination.
Perfect, thank you. My first question is there any situation in which the use of offensive cyber weaponry is warranted?
Sure, so we think that the NSA does a pretty good job with cyber weapons right now. We're telling you the distinction here under the resolution is the Department of Defense would make these. Well, number one, we think this is a redundancy, but besides that, sure, there can be some use, but we think the NSA is probably better at it because it isn't a declaration of war.
Okay, I'll move on from that. Thank you for making that distinction. Secondly, can the impact of a kinetic weapon be reversed? Can you recall a bullet?
No, but you also can't recall a virus that infects hospitals in India and Pakistan, shutting off neonatal units.
So, given that the current state of offensive cyber weaponry is clumsy, you would say we would need to refine it through some means, correct?
Sure, this idea that it is clumsy, we think you can't get rid of that because there are multiple systems that use Windows around the world, about 70% of computers, and that's where we introduce these bugs into.
Right, so we ought not invest in improving our capacity to exploit those systems to reduce the collateral impact of this. Is that what you're advocating?
Sure. So there's this idea that you can get rid of all collateral damage on their side of the house. We tell you that's physically impossible when 70% of the world uses Windows and these viruses exploit Windows to get into the system.
Right. Thank you.
Honorable panel, I'm going to clear up this debate through two roles. One being the affirmative, where you take the chance of increasing offensive means, and one through the negation, where we focus on defense and the status quo and keeping our strategy the same. One, when you look to offense, they say offense equals defense. We've proven to you that no, this is a zero-sum game. If you spend $50 million on offensive weapons, it is less money in defensive operators' hands, and less vulnerabilities patched because of that. You're taking away focus from the 1.5 million vulnerabilities that still exist and holes that need to be patched, and focusing on offensive needs. At the point where it is a zero-sum game, we refer to the status quo, where it's preferable to actually focus on the defensive operations and actually increase our home network security at home to protect us against from the escalation of our enemies before we actually trigger a cyber war through a DoD Title X action. Going on to the other reason why affirmative wants you to vote for them is because of versatility, right? And we argue back that cyber weapons are not versatile at the point where they have the low probability of success. This point doesn't go refuted through my original speech, where a change in code or any change of the home system of our adversary means that the offensive weapon is now useless and cannot be used in this means. So it means that $50 million was wasted. Although it was not a large chunk of money in the scheme of things, we say that money would have been better spent in defensive operator hands at the point where it is asymmetrically effective to patch existing vulnerabilities and protect us from the enemies. So we say that conventional means are better with versatility, and we should not focus on the offensive means. So that's why you're not voting for the affirmative team, but why you will vote for the negative team is because the harms of offensive cyber capabilities that we've already outlined outweigh the benefits that they present. One, we say that the blueprints of cyber weapons that the United States would then give out if we deploy these weapons is too harmful for us to risk, right? My partner gives the example of Shamoon about how when we, quote unquote, deployed Stuxnet, then Iran returned with a similar code and deployed this against Saudi Arabia. Because cyber weapons are extraterritorial means, we don't think the United States should be contributing to this escalation and giving our adversaries the actual blueprints to use them against our allies. Secondarily, we say that the impact of cyber weapons is less controlled. They say conventional means are less controlled as well, but we say at the point where the majority of cyber systems are operating on Windows, you cannot prevent the spread of these viruses. That's why we had Stuxnet going into neighboring countries as well, and we could not control this virus. Third reason why the harms of offense outweigh the benefits is because of the inefficient and unreliable means. At the point where we have this low probability of success, we think spending the money elsewhere would be beneficial. That's why we presented you the idea of increasing defensive means versus offensive. That is why you're voting for the negation team, is because we need to prioritize defense and how it can lead to an actual better offense in the future through cheaper means and safer means. Because the DoD has this obligation to protect ourselves and citizens in the defensive space before we look to offense, we must prioritize protecting our home networks before we look abroad. Thus, we urge you to vote negation.
I think that the other side, the Air Force team, has stumbled into a contradiction that will ultimately make it problematic for their case. Now, there's one argument that you've been hearing, that they've been talking about how cyber weapons are ineffective, can't reach the targets that they need to reach, and they're unable to reach the targets that we want them to reach. But then on the other hand, they'll tell you that these cyber weapons are so effective that they affect everyone in the world who has a Windows computer. I think at the end of the day, it's this contradiction that shows that cyber weapons are something that we don't know a lot about. We think that at the end of the day, through an investment in offensive capabilities, not only do we learn about the systems that exist now, but we also learn about the capabilities that others will attempt to develop in the future and use against the United States. Now, there's been no answer to the fact of what my partner brought up when he says to the fact of how cyber weaponry is something that's constantly evolving. If we don't place ourselves in the realm of understanding how that change happens, we will never be able to address the threats before they happen, but simply play a game of reaction where we attempt to plug whatever the threat is for the current day. We think that this model is bad, and more importantly, when you combine that with the fact of how cyber weaponry is something that can be used not only when it comes to defense, but also when it comes to offensive capabilities on a large and a small scale, we understand that cyber weaponry is something that is versatile both when it comes to offense and a multitude of scale when it comes to defensive capabilities. But secondly, let's talk about this Title 10 of the DoD versus the NSA, right? I think that when the United States deploys this weapon, either through the DoD or through NSA, China, Iran, Russia will not make the differentiation between Title 10 and Title 50. They will declare it as an act of war. We think that the Department of Defense, the most experienced branch when it comes to offensive cyber capabilities, should be the leadership when it comes to this. But finally, I want to talk about this expensiveness and the blueprint, right? They've given you this idea that cyber weapons are expensive by saying $50 million for a particular threat. Yet, they've also talked about the fact of how conventional weaponry reaches into the billions of dollars when it comes to cost. When it comes to the ultimate impact of cyber weaponry, to be able to still alter the position of the bridge, whether we bomb it with a J-35 or JDAM, or we do it with a cyber weaponry is ultimately the thing that we need when it comes to focus, the thing that we need when it comes to being able to accurately use the weaponry we have without the major cost when it comes to the impact on civilian populations and the impact on DoD budgets. Now, I think that the affirmative is going to be the ballot that you ultimately cast for 2 reasons. We've proven to you how versatility is important, and we've shown how cyber weapons can not only reach a multitude of offensive threats, but also deal with the defensive things that we'll have to worry about when it comes to the future. We are the only side that is ever able to address the things that are going to be able to come into the future. But secondly, I think that at the end of the day, we've shown how status quo offensive operations are murky. And the only way that we can ever fix and make them effective when it comes to future endeavors is to invest now in offensive capabilities in the Department of Defense. Thank you.
Okay, so what's going to happen now is our judges are going to convene. For those of us that are watching online that may have not heard at the beginning, once again, comments that were made by the cadets do not reflect their views, the Academy or the Department of Defense. Just want to make sure that you were listening a little too late that you heard that. And if you're coming a little late, the resolution was resolved that the United States should substantially increase its offensive capability, cyber capabilities. So we're going to take a short break while the judges confer. When the judges come back, we'll have a winner. The judges make decision. Before the judges give us their decision, we're going to take a quick poll from the audience to see if we've changed any minds. So rather than ask for the app, let's just see if there's any increase in the neg. Raise your hand if you agree with the neg against that the U.S. should substantially increase its offensive cyber capabilities. Okay, so I don't think we changed any minds. I don't think those were hands that I saw before, so I'm going to say we had 0 hands. I'm just going to say the 4 that we raised hands before I changed the minds. So with that being said, I'll give the floor to the judges to render a decision.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to say on behalf of your panel of judges this evening that this was really a joy to witness such preparation and argument and pitched points of view. And I would just say if this was an easy decision, we would have been back here 15 minutes earlier. It was not an easy decision. But the consensus of your judges this evening is that the affirmative arguments prevail.
Well, I truly appreciate all the time and effort that went into this, and the way that you compose yourselves and present your arguments are absolutely fantastic. I think the skills that you developed here during your undergraduate careers really will serve you well on active duty. That I would hate to debate you in any forum myself, so hopefully I'll retire by the time you're in a position to debate me. But I thought that all the arguments, there were some great arguments on both sides. Just a general comment that I was kind of surprised that most of the arguments were framed from both sides, and to me anyway, it appeared as kind of traditional battle partners, right? Kind of the typical nation state that you kind of know who's playing and who's not, when in fact many of these cyber attacks are probably going to come from non-nation state actors, and how you address those. There's also an interesting game theory piece to this as well that seems to play out, that the offensive side, I thought, could have really emphasized, the affirmative side could have emphasized the kind of the game theoretic impact of when you create an offensive capability, it's going to put them on their heels to the same degree that you were concerned about the defensive piece, right? That you could bankrupt other non-nation state actors just through your offensive capabilities. And so those are some things that I didn't hear strongly addressed on either side, but I thought on the negative side, the cost piece was an interesting component, but I don't know how we value this. I don't know how we can really put our finger on the defensive cost. I think that we see many cases of defenses failing. Right? We're attacked all the time, and banks, I know, are penetrated routinely. Probably it could be 99%, 95%. I don't know, but that small percentage is just really hard to defend against. And then I think the precision of our offensive capabilities. So the idea that we release something into the wild, and I think the examples that you used were largely Stuxnet or virus-based, and I think it would have been great to somehow recognize the very precise attacks that we can do. I mean, we can take down jetliners, right? It's been proven that we can do that. That's a very specific thing. I did like though the fact that your offensive weapons can be turned on you, so that was a great argument. I felt that and there was kind of an imbalance, I think, in terms of the difficulty of arguing the cases, and you saw the polls at the beginning, right? It was 26-4 who felt this, and so there were just a couple things that I felt that could have been stronger, the cost piece, and then also the recognition of the precision of cyber weapons and how that plays into the arguments. So great job on both sides. And I'll debate you afterwards about whether or not it's my first time as a debate judge. So I appreciate the chance to share my thoughts, and congratulations to both teams. You did an absolutely amazing job, and that's why it took us so long. General Jen.
Well, let me also just add just a phenomenal performance by both teams. And this is a tough topic, and I think as we were talking through it, I think we started seeing some of the issues that could really continue to be poked in the layers come out of it. As General, as both General Sutton and General Armacost, I mean, I would not want to, I'm glad that you are our future when you get back out there and debate. And these skills will just serve you so well, no matter what path you choose in terms of the military and beyond. But let me just maybe share a little bit of some of the murkiness that would have been fun, I think, to even poke some more in. I really liked how you talked about the morality of some of the issues, and I think you could really have stretched that and make it very impactful in terms of now we're going after societies, right, and how that's different somehow, which I think that would strengthen it. I like the idea about the opportunity cost, and I think if you could really dig into that would further that argument and you start talking about the cost of things. When you talk about deterrence, and just going back to what General Armacost talked about, are we talking, you tended to talk mostly about states, right? But when you think about deterrence, how do you think about deterrence in the kind of environment that we're in now, when it is hard, right, to figure out who's actually the perpetrator? You know, how do you go back? And I think that might be something as you think through, if you can continue to debate this resolution, to maybe think about that. And it's interesting, too, going back to some of the international relations literature and trying to distinguish between the offense and defense. Where does it get blurred? And that might be an interesting way to also make some of the arguments pro or con, you know, depending on how you might think about that. The part that probably, and I was torn. I think the bottom line that pushed me towards affirmative was this notion of the defense being able to be 100%. You know, and I thought your point, nothing's ever 100%, and you don't want to be rocked on your heels. So for the argument of it being, I think if you're able to explain a little bit more about it being asymmetrical, and why that could be powerful, I think that would strengthen the argument as well. But this was, you all did a phenomenal job, and I'd want all of you on my team. How's that?
Absolutely.
But thank you very much.
All right, thank you everyone for attending. This concludes the debate.
And this is Ken Kreitzer at West Point. I have a chance to talk to three visitors from the United States Air Force Academy from Colorado Springs in for the debate, and they argued on one of the positions tonight in this very formal, very impressive debate. And one of the judges, let's start with, is the Dean of the U.S. Air Force Academy. And General, good to see you. What is it like for you to participate in a debate?
So this is a tremendous opportunity for me. It's great to be here to represent the Air Force Academy, and it's my first time ever judging a debate. And let me tell you, the pressure was on the judges, I think almost as much as it was on the debaters. And it was a real joy to hear the cadets from both sides articulate their points, come up with great data-based comments that they make, and then just the point-counterpoint that was going on, and kind of the parrying of arguments and the lobbing of other arguments at the other side just really showed the great critical thinking skills that our cadets have. It was a real honor to be a part of it.
Absolutely, and let's ask Sarah, who was a senior at the Air Force Academy and did a great job arguing the point. Just tell us again the resolution tonight, and how did you prepare for it?
So the resolution was the Department of Defense should increase their cyber offensive capabilities, and we just prepared by talking to cyber experts at our school and kind of doing some research into what does offensive capabilities look like and why do the harms outweigh the benefits of them, looking at costs associated, looking at trade-offs, etc. So we just did our homework and then prepared our speeches and practiced them.
Absolutely, and I know you're a senior. What would you like to do in the Air Force after graduation and commissioning?
Yes, sir. I actually received my job. I'm going to be a combat systems officer, which is either a weapons, electronic warfare, or navigation specialist on our aircraft. So it is in the rated community. I'm hoping to be a weapons specialist in the back of an F-15. So that's the goal.
Very impressive. And our third cadet, Otino, you did a great job with putting your case forward. What was it like to prepare for this topic?
It was really a lot of fun. This is a field that I knew almost nothing about prior to the debate, so I think just learning more about it is the reason that we're in this club to begin with. We really just like that broad knowledge base, and just getting to practice public speaking and on the fields of friendly strife with the Army, like, it doesn't get better than that.
Absolutely. What are your favorite activities at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs? One of my favorite parts of the country.
I'm actually an instructor pilot down at the airfield, so I teach people how to fly the gliders over there. I love to go skiing, and honestly, we travel a lot for debate. It consumes a lot of my time, but I really do love it.
That's great. Congratulations. Good to see you. And I just asked the Dean, what's the debate and oratorical skills are so important to all of us at the American Legion. What are some of the skills that you see that these cadets are learning by participating? It's really impressive to see them.
I think I mentioned this before, but the idea to put some critical thoughts together on very complex issues and to be able to articulate them to a panel of judges and also the audience, it's just very impressive. So communication is one of the most important things we hope to get out of Air Force Academy cadets education, as well as critical thinking. And I think what we saw tonight was showcased at both of those critical talents. They did a wonderful job.
Absolutely. Hopefully next year I can come out to see the debate before the Army Air Force game out in Colorado Springs. Great to see our three visitors from the Air Force Academy, and congratulations on a great job from all of us at the American Legion. This is Ken Kreitzer at West Point for Sons of the American Legion Radio. Okay, and this is Ken Kreitzer for Sons of the American Legion Radio at West Point. We just had a great time watching a debate between the cadets from the Air Force Academy and West Point, and the affirmative won tonight, argued by the team from here at Army. And we understand we've got a couple of guys who both went to Boise State, which is great to see. Maybe just introduce yourself. I know you're from Texas.
Hi, I'm Cadet Quanzel Caston from Houston, Texas, a firstie. I did go to Boise State 2012, Texas.
That's great to hear. We've got James. Just introduce yourself again and where you're from.
Thank you so much, sir. James Hickey here from Falls Church, Virginia. Also a Boise State graduate from the great state of Virginia.
That's wonderful to hear. And just tell us a little bit about what do you learn from participating in debate? We just heard from General Jeb how important it is and how valuable this skill is on later life. What did you learn from participating in a debate such as this?
I think that it is a great opportunity not only for us to show a different side of the academies, one that's not necessarily military focused, but really academic based, but also just a great chance for us to participate in the festivities of the weekend and still have our passions, shown for the Corps, as well as victory for the Army team.
Absolutely. And James, just what goes into preparation for something like this? How much preparation, and what are some of the factors you're thinking about in preparing for debate?
Sure. So I think that really what it comes down to is gathering depth and breadth of arguments. So when you're looking for your sources, you want to know what everyone in the conversation is saying. In addition to that, you're looking to answer before the other team says it, what their arguments are going to be. So I came up to the debate today with a pre-written explanation because I assumed that they were going to make the argument that our program was going to be too expensive. So those sorts of tactics help you immensely in these types of debates.
Okay, and I know you got another debate against Navy coming up in Baltimore next month. What are some of the things you enjoy about the debating season and some of the debates you participate in?
I just love the intellectual challenge. It's always a good time to be able to test your thoughts, have a forum where people are listening to argumentation, a good argumentation, and have an ability to be able to have that debate. Debate's wonderful.
Just got to ask you, branch night's coming up. What part of the Army would you like to go to?
Army. I want to go to the armored branch, combat armored decision. Let's go.
That's great. And James, just again, what do you look forward to? Do you have another debate you may participate in?
Yeah, so Army Navy is going to be our biggest competition coming up. So it's going to be all hands on deck, making sure that there's no chance that the Naval Academy is able to come back and take the upcoming Commander-in-Speech trophy from us.
Commander-in-Speech trophy, I love it. What part of the Army would you like to head to?
Military intelligence is my number one choice. So if there are any high-ranking generals out there who want to give me a bid, James K. Hickey, find me. Contact the Office of Economic and Manpower Analysis. Let them know. James Hickey for Military Intelligence.
That's great, and I'm sure you'll do a great job when you get there. But really, congratulations. Both of you are graduates of one of the American Legion's premier programs, Boys State, and seeing you on the debate stage is so inspiring, and we know you're going to do a great job when you commission and join the great U.S. Army. So good to see you both.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Pleasure. This is Ken Kreitzer for Sons of the American Legion Radio at the United States Military Academy.